All right. As we jump in, I want to just make sure that we are kind of remembering what it is that we have already covered. Really, everything begins where? All right, with creation. In the beginning, right? So it begins with creation. Everything was very good. It was exactly the way that it was supposed to be. God rested on the seventh day, which means that he stopped his work, his creative work. It was complete. He finished it. Now he's going to enjoy his creation. So the seventh day is supposed to be a time of fellowship between God and his creation. So you kind of start with creation itself until what happens? All right, sin. What chapter do you find that in? All right, so Genesis chapter 3, which is the first of 5 key passages in the Old Testament. And Genesis chapter 3 is where you have the fall. And ultimately, what happens to man? All right, they're separated from God, really. They're kicked out of the garden. They're removed from access to the tree of life. And now we begin the story anew. Really, chapters 1 through 11 create a prologue which introduces the problem and starts to demonstrate what's going on. But the prologue ends and the story really begins with whom? Abraham. Or Abram is fine. You know, I've heard it both ways. So where does his story really begin? Genesis chapter 12, right? And what happens in Genesis chapter 12? All right, promises to Abraham. So, this is the second key passage of the Old Testament. Here we are. We've just gone 12 chapters and we've already got 2 out of 5. Seems a little distorted to some degree. Don't worry. These are the only ones that we're going to have in Genesis. But what were the main promises that we talked about? All right, a nation, land, and then, all right, seed, which we get the word seed from what chapter? It's not 12. All right, good, that's exactly right, Dick. Chapter 22, where he says, in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And that's where we ended last week, was with chapter 22, looking at the binding of Isaac. As the story is, we noticed how there's connections with Jesus and what it is that Abraham believed. It's what he believed in chapter 15. It's what he believes in chapter 22. What is it that Abraham believed?
That he would have his son.
All right, that's excellent, Joshua, that he would have his son. Even in what circumstance? Even in death, right? That he would, just as Joshua said, he would have his son even in the midst of death. Whether it was the deadness of his own body and the deadness of Sarah's womb to produce children in chapter 15, or it was if God told him to kill his son, he would still have that son because he fully believed in the promise. As Paul said in Romans chapter 4, fully believing that what God had promised, he was also able to what? Right, he's also able to perform. Fantastic. Romans 4:21. That's a fantastic definition. I prefer that definition for faith over Hebrews 11:1. I think it really encapsulates the idea of trust, trusting in God, trusting in God's promises. So yeah, he knew he would have his son even in the midst of death because this is a promised son. We're going to move out of Abraham's story tonight as we continue moving forward. And who is Abraham's son? All right, we're going to focus on Isaac. Now, how many sons does Abraham have of importance? He has two, right? And then we know that he has a few more later. We're not going to deal with those, talk about those. They just get a blip on the radar. But we do know, is Isaac Abraham's firstborn? No. What, Joshua, did you just say Ishmael? Is that what Nice. Man, Joshua is on fire tonight. That's right. Abraham's other son was Ishmael, who comes before Isaac. And yet what you see, not every time, but what you see through especially the Genesis narrative, let's just start with the very first children. You look at the firstborn, how does the firstborn fare? The very first children. Who were the very first children? Cain, Abel, Seth, right? So, how does the firstborn fare? Not well, right? He should have been the one to carry out the seed promise from Genesis 3:15 moving forward. He does not. Because of his sin, he kind of throws that away. And then it's Seth who ends up taking that, who, when Seth is born, Eve says that he's a replacement for the son that I lost due to the brother that killed him. So you have that from the very beginning, and it's kind of a pattern that you tend to see. Again, it's not everyone. I believe Abraham was a firstborn. I might be mistaken. Somebody's going to look that up real quick, just in case I am, because they really want to rub that in if I'm wrong. But Abraham might be the firstborn. But really, beyond that, Isaac is not the firstborn, and he's the one that the blessing is going to come through. How many children does Isaac have?
2.
2, yes. That's right. Who are his children?
Jacob.
That's right. And you. All right, very good. That's right. Man, he is nailing it tonight. So, firstborn, Esau. Is he the one through whom the blessing's going to go? No, it's not going to fare well. What about Jacob? How many children does Jacob have? 12. Sons. How many sons?
12.
That's good. I'm not putting names down. So he has 12. Who is his oldest? Reuben. Is he the one through whom the blessing's going to go? No, he's not. Do you see kind of this emerging pattern that plays itself out? By the way, this right here, we'll talk about it eventually. This is a huge part of Paul's argumentation in Romans. It's going to play a big part in Romans chapter 9. Anyway, you see this whole thing where we're going to focus on Isaac, and then we're going to focus on Jacob, and then ultimately, even though he's not the one through whom the blessing ultimately goes, who do we focus on in Jacob's line? All right, Joseph, right? And then that's going to be the flow of Genesis. Now, again, we're not going to bog down a ton in Isaac's story. He's kind of there as part of Abraham's story, and then he's kind of there as part of Jacob's story. He really only gets one chapter to himself. It's chapter 26 in Genesis. That's where you find Isaac's Toledot. You all remember the word Toledot? Who remembers what the word Toledot means? Yeah, Lorraine? Okay, yeah, these are the generations of, the genealogy of, and you find multiple ones. Let's see here. We talked about the ones for, leading up through Noah, Shem, and then Terah, which led into Abraham. So in chapter 25, You get the one for Ishmael. He's not up here on the board. And then for Isaac, 36. There are a couple of them for Esau as he is following his story. And then chapter 37, you find Jacob's. And so these are the generations. Chapter 25, 19, though, is where we start in on Isaac's. And he just doesn't have much to his story. Even here, this is all about the birth of Jacob and Esau. And this was obviously something was going on. You know, like siblings are wont to do. They must have been fighting in the womb a little bit so that Rebekah went to find out what was going on. And what did she learn? In chapter 25, verse 23. Anybody remember what she learned? Okay, yeah, she learned, first of all, that there were two in there, and they're fighting. These are going to turn into two nations. Two peoples will be divided. One will be stronger than the other. Which one will serve which?
The older will serve the younger.
That's right, very good. The older one is going to serve the younger one. She has this information. Who does not? That's right, man. That's exactly it. There's nothing in here that suggests in any way, shape, or form that when she finds this out, she tells Isaac this information. In fact, I think there's everything, given what we know of her and her personality, that would lead us to believe that she would prefer to do what? Instead of telling him, she's going to keep it to herself. Information is power, right? And she is one who is all about manipulation, trickery, deceit, lying, all of that. Yeah, I think very much what we're seeing is a part of her coming through when she finds this information out, so that when they have two children, which one does she kind of claim as hers?
Jacob.
Yeah. The one who's going to be in control, right? The older is going to serve the younger. So the younger is the one that she attaches to. Now Isaac is going to then attach to the older. And by the way, I'm probably going to say the wrong name tonight 3 or 4 times. So if you just kind of say, wait, hold on, who? That doesn't sound right. You are probably correct, and I said the wrong name. Just so you know, it gets jumbled up when I'm talking about Jacob or Isaac or Rebekah or Rachel, Leah. I mean, just all these names just kind of get convoluted. So just know that probably will happen. I'll mean Isaac at some point when I say Jacob. Just go by what you know that I mean in those instances. All right, so I don't want to spend too much time with this. I think we're probably familiar with the sibling rivalry that's taking place. We know fairly early on that Esau, what's his claim to fame? He's a what?
He's a hunter.
He's a hunter. He goes out and he hunts. And apparently he's gone out at some point. He tried to hunt. And, it'd probably be like me if I tried to go out and hunt and I'd come back empty-handed at some point. And he comes back and he assumes that he's going to what? He's going to die. And so Jacob has just fixed a nice stew. Smells good, looks good, and his brother comes in famished. And of course, brotherly love, the way that you should treat your brother, Jacob says, oh man, I'm really sorry about that. Here, I've got plenty of stew. Why don't you have some? Right? No? That's the way it should be, isn't it? What does he do instead? Yeah, he sells his stew to him for this birthright of Esau's, this legitimate birthright, this idea that he's supposed to, in some respects, carry the head of the house moving forward after Isaac's death. And Jacob shows himself to be a conniving weasel, is what's happening here. Instead of being kind, generous, and helpful, he basically forces his brother into the situation, and his brother is so famished and can't think past 10 minutes in front of him that he's like, I'm going to die anyway, what's good? What does it matter if I have this or not? Sure, take it. You're supposed to be getting a picture of these people that should not surprise you. Because one of the first pictures that we have of Abraham is his doing what with Pharaoh? Lying, deceit, trickery, manipulation, fudging the facts, making things work a little bit differently, right? We see that. And as we continue on, we know that Isaac is relatively close in family-wise to Rebekah. And so this is, coming from the same line. Remember, Abraham sent his servant back to their place, their family, in order to find someone for Isaac. So it's the same family line. By the way, Rebekah's brother, anybody remember who Rebekah's brother was?
Laban?
Yeah, Laban. It's a name to remember. So Rebekah's brother is Laban. All right. So you come now to Esau and Jacob, and what you see is more conniving, lies, you'll see it, yeah. But right now, manipulation, taking advantage of the situation in order to get yourself ahead, not caring about the other person, just caring about what you can get out of the other person, right? So it's a very negative picture that we're seeing of these people, and this negative picture is what we're supposed to see from these people. That's what the text is telling us. They're not good people. They don't consider other people. They don't think about them. They think about themselves. So, as we move down the story, should it surprise us at all to find deceit, lies, manipulation, fudging information, things like that? No. We're familiar with the story, right? That Isaac is supposedly on his deathbed, although he lasts quite a bit longer after this. But he's supposedly on his deathbed, and he's going to now give the blessing, the family blessing that's going to go on. And he tells Esau, hey, it's time for this blessing. Why don't you go and hunt some game, bring me back something. You know what I like. You know how I like it. This is going to be really good, and then I can give you the blessing. Who hears?
Rebecca.
Yeah. Rebecca up there is like, oh, all right, so about how long is it going to take him? I think we've got enough time. Come on, Jacob. Let's set this up. Let's go, let's kill the animal, and let's have you bring it in. You pretend to be Esau. And Jacob's like, it's not going to work. All he has to do is touch my arm, and he'll realize it's not me. And she's like, don't worry about this. I got it. We got you taken care of. You just stick with me. She puts the goat skin on him, sends him in. And, and Isaac's like, all right, you smell like him, but you certainly don't sound like him. You sound more like Jacob. He's like, let me touch your arm. And he does, and this tells you just how, I've thought that I'm kind of hairy before, but I don't think anybody would ever think that they were touching a goat skin. But whatever works, right? He's like, all right, I guess I'm convinced. He eats the meat, and he gives his blessing to Jacob, and Jacob leaves, and who walks in? Esau. Esau comes in, and he's like, all right, here's your food. I'm ready for that blessing. And what does Isaac do? What's that? Yeah. He trembles. He's just like, something, this isn't right. You were just here. What happened? You know, and realize what had happened. Does he revoke the blessing and change it? Why not? I actually think he could have, if he wanted to. But not based on the text of Genesis. Because the way the text of Genesis sounds, it's exact what Kelly said, it sounds like he can't. And the way that it is written there, he says, I have no blessing for you, and he says, well, give me something, right? And he doesn't give him a blessing at that point. Excuse me. Verse 39, Isaac his father answered and said, behold, away from the fatness of the earth will be your dwelling, away from the dew of heaven on high, by your sword you will live, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. So, he basically doesn't revoke this. Why? If he could, why might he not? And where else might I be getting maybe some idea as to why I think maybe he could have, he just didn't? Any ideas? Is he mentioned? Is this mentioned in Hebrews 11? By faith, Abraham did what? By faith, Isaac did what? Let's go look at it. Let's see here. Verse 20, by faith Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. How does he do that by faith? Kelly, you need a mic though, probably. There we go. The mic's on its way now. Kelly Hafer, I should have said, sorry.
There's no way that Isaac can make a blessing come true. It's going to happen after he dies. It's by faith that God has a plan and that God's going to carry out that plan, and especially if Isaac's wishes are in line with that plan.
Okay.
Like
all right.
He can't affect it.
Sort of. I want to focus on the carrying out of God's plan and understanding that. But if you do something by faith, then that means that you have made a choice, doesn't it? I mean, if you do something that you're programmed to do and there is no choice, then are you walking by faith? No, walking by faith means that you have a choice between two options, and you take the option that demonstrates your faith in whatever's taking place. That's why I believe, because the Hebrews author here tells us that he does this very thing by faith, that means he had a choice in what he was going to do. His choosing Jacob over Esau, was that his choice? His giving the blessing to Jacob, was that his choice? No, he thought he was giving it to Esau. So what was his choice? not taking it back. His choice was saying, God's involved here somewhere. And this goes to what Kelly, I think, was saying, that there's a larger picture that's going on right here that's caused this to take place. I have given this blessing. I'm not going to revoke it. I'm going to trust that this must be what God wants. So by faith, he gave his blessing to Jacob and not to Esau. I think that's how we're supposed to see this, that he was bamboozled, but when he recognized what had taken place, he didn't just get upset, call Jacob back in, and revoke the one and give it away. He said, this is the way that it is. And now here's the only blessing that I have for you. And as Kelly pointed out, this is how things play out. You see this take place with the descendants of Esau and their relationship with Israel. All right. Y'all see this picture that we have here? And again, we're dealing with a very dysfunctional family. This is a really messed up family that's starting really up here with Abraham. They lie, they deceive, they manipulate. You get to the point Rebekah is taking advantage of the blindness of her husband in order to get what she wants. This stuff is messed up. I mean, these are not good people. They don't have any other people's interests at heart. They only have their own. They're only seeking after themselves. And this only continues because once this happens, what's the relationship between Esau and Jacob now? Yeah. The only reason that Esau doesn't just go ballistic on Jacob right now is because he's honoring his father. But as soon as dad's dead, he's dead. And remember, in their eyes, that's probably not too long, although it is going to take some time, but they don't realize that at the moment. So Rebekah's concerned. What does she do? Yeah, she sends Jacob off, but does she have the authority to send Jacob away? No, we know that because she doesn't, right? Who does? Isaac sends him away, and it's because she comes to Isaac and says, look, Isaac, Esau is really upset with Jacob right now, and I think he's going to kill him, so let's send him out of here to protect him. Is that what she says to him? Anybody know? No, that's what she wants. That is the thing that she's upset about. Instead, she goes to Isaac and she says, hey, I'm scared that Jacob is going to marry these Canaanites like Esau did, and you know how much I hate his wives. Let's send him back to find a wife from among our people. What would we call that? When she has one thing in mind, but she presents something else, what is that? That's a lie. This is another deception. This is another manipulation. She is trying to get her husband to do what she wants him to do, but not for the same reason. This whole thing is just messed up. And it seems like every generation, it's just getting worse. And so, yeah, he goes out. Jacob is now going to take off and go back to their home in order to find a wife. All right, so he leaves. Something kind of cool, just to point out, it's just really interesting. Let's see here. In chapter 28, verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba, went toward Haran. Remember we talked about Haran and where Haran is. If you've got Israel over here, and then remember, over here is where was, and they were going to go to this area, but they went across and down. They stopped up there in Haran is where they stopped. That's where the family is. And then Abraham took his wife and took Lot, and they went on down to the land of Canaan. But his family is up here. So Jacob is now making his way up to Haran. And it's just this little tidbit right here. Verse 11, he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Now, that may not mean much until you realize that the sun is not mentioned again for a very long time. That doesn't mean that the sun doesn't set, doesn't rise. It, of course, does in all of this time, but it's not mentioned. Does anybody know what's happening the next time that the sun is mentioned, by any chance? No, it's a good thought. Lorraine asked about Joshua. It's going to be in Jacob's life. Kelly, did you have? No. Yeah, the next time it mentions the sun coming up is as Jacob is returning to the land. And that's the next time, and it mentions that the sun was rising as he was crossing a river to make his way back over. In other words, what's another name that we're going to have for Jacob? Israel. As Israel leaves their land of promise, or his land of promise, what happens? They go into darkness, and when they come back, they what? Come into light. The sun sets, the sun rises. It's a neat picture, these types of things that you see, that they're there. These just little tidbits that are just so cool to see. So, as Israel now is leaving, he comes up to Laban, and we're familiar with this story as well. We'll see how much of this we can get through. As he comes up, he comes to Laban, and Laban is whose brother? I said that right? Yeah. Rebecca. What do we know of Rebecca again? Sweet, innocent little girl, right? No. Conniving, manipulative, lying, tricking type of a person. If this is her family, what might we anticipate we're going to see?
Same thing.
Same type of thing, right? So, we know this story. Jacob comes up, starts spending some time, and he starts working, doing a really good job for Laban. Laban's like, dude, I should start paying you for what you're doing. And what is it that Jacob wants? He wants Laban's daughter, Rachel. So what's the deal that they make? All right, tell you what, that's great. Work 7 years, and then I will provide you with my daughter, right? So that's the deal that's made, and we know this story, right? He worked 7 years. He's so excited about it. It's like it was a day. You know, he's so excited, gets there. I don't really know how this happens. I don't know their wedding customs or things such as that. I'd have to imagine that people got pretty verschnickered that evening or whatever the case is, because he goes to consummate the marriage, and when he wakes up in the morning, what does it say?
It's Leah.
Behold, it was Leah. Now, tell me what you know about Leah.
She wasn't very pretty.
Okay, not very pretty. She was the older, didn't see very well. Serena?
She was the oldest in the Jewish custom. The oldest girl is to be married first. Or
Maybe.
In that custom, it wasn't
Maybe.
custom at the time.
Maybe. Yeah. We'll get to that. Yeah. Apparently, there was something up with her eyes. I don't know if she had a lazy eye. She had weak eyes. And I don't think it necessarily means she didn't see well. I think it means probably more, as Jeff said, she wasn't good to look at. You didn't want to see her well, is probably more what's at play. Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance, right? He's like, yeah, her I want, I enjoy. She's very pleasant to my eyes. Leah, not so much. And so when he believes, he's done the work for Rachel, and then he gets up in the morning and he's looking at the weak eyes instead. How do you think he feels about that?
Probably not very happy.
Probably not very happy. Now, keep in mind, this is the guy who's done what before in his life? He tricked his father, who was blind and on his deathbed, into giving him the blessing, right? I don't know how despicable you can get to take advantage of a dying man who is blind and to take advantage of that person. So, before we start feeling sorry for Jacob, I think it's important for us to see this whole thing is messed up, top to bottom. This is just the way it is. And this goes to what Serena was saying a second ago. He goes to Laban, he's like, what gives? You gave me the wrong person. Laban's like, oh, well, of course. You should have known that in our customs, we can't marry off the second one, the younger one, before the older one. I had to marry the older one to you. Now, whether that's legitimate or not, I couldn't tell you. Because look at the source, right? He's not the kind of person that is going to be forceful and upfront. And maybe it was, and he withheld the information, or whatever the case is. He has pulled a fast one. And it's already done. It's already consummated. He can't take it back. This is the way that it is. But he says, I tell you what, go through your honeymoon period and go through all of that, and then I'll let you marry the other one if you agree to work another 7 years. And so they now strike yet another deal that has him working yet another 7 years. This time, though, he doesn't have to wait the 7 years before they marry. He actually gets to marry her. And so now he has 2 wives as he is working his time with Laban. I want to look at what we see from this story. This actually, and I hope we have the time to get through it, this actually is a beautiful story, but it has a whole lot of stuff that's messed up. So, as we go into this, you have 2 wives. Tell me about Jacob's feelings towards Leah.
He didn't like her.
All right, very good. She is unloved. What about towards Rachel?
He loved her.
Yeah, she is loved. And they are both married to him. So let's take a look at how all of this plays out. They're now married. Let's go to chapter 29, Genesis chapter 29, verse 31. When the Lord saw Leah was what?
Unloved.
Hated. Do you guys have unloved in your? Does it really?
American Standard is, New American News is unloved.
Okay. ESV says hated. Oops. Did something with the mic there. ESV says hated. I would have to go and look at that, and I don't want to take the time to do that at the moment. But unloved, hated, despised. You get to the same place, right? He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So, Now we're setting up the stage. Leah starts to have children. It says, verse 32, Leah conceived, bore a son, called his name Reuben, and said what? What's that? Okay. Before you get to that point, though, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, now my husband will love me. Does anybody notice anything interesting in that statement? Tell me about the word Lord. It's all caps. What does it mean when you see the word Lord in all caps? That's the name Yahweh, Jehovah, right? This is the name of whose God? Yeah, this is the name of Jacob's God, right? And by the way, as Jacob was making his way out, and we talked about the sun setting, that's where he had his dream. The Lord came to him, and the Lord told him, don't worry, I'm going with you. Just because you're leaving here doesn't mean you're leaving me behind. I'm going to be with you wherever you go. And you start to see a transformation that takes place here with Jacob. He starts to change from the punk kid that he was before. And so the Lord sees that gives her the son. She apparently has taken Jacob's God as her own. I think this is very significant. That she says, the Lord has looked on my affliction, now my husband will love me. Did that happen? Was she loved because she bore a child for him? No. It didn't. That's the desperate cry for wanting to be accepted. Maybe if I give this, we'll share this bond. This will make all the difference. It doesn't. Doesn't make a difference at all. 33, she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord, by the way, what name? Yahweh, Jacob's God. Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he's given me this son also. She called his name Simeon. Verse 34, she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore, his name was called Levi. How's this going for her? Is it working? 1 son, still unloved. 2 sons, still unloved. 3 sons, still unloved. Verse 35, she conceived again, bore a son. What does she say this time? Is there now a desperate hope that he's going to start loving her? No. I mean, he's willing to use her, obviously, because she keeps having children, but there's no love attachment. And she says, you know what? I'll just resign myself to where I am. I will praise Yahweh. I will praise the Lord. I'm just going to focus on this relationship because this one, it's just not happening. So there is something about Leah that is connecting her to Jacob's God, that she has now connected over to him. Well, Rachel, who is seeing that Jacob's having all of these children with Leah, she gets envious, so what does she do? First she goes to Jacob and says, give me children or I'll die. Is there anything wrong with that attitude? Yeah, it's, first of all, blaming him as if, this is his fault. And what's her attitude? Why does she want a child?
We're at a sibling rivalry.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with her relationship with her husband. It has nothing to do with a wholesome, loving relationship. It has everything to do with the fact that her sister is producing children and she's not, and that makes her upset, and that makes her angry, and she can't take it anymore. And you see Jacob, his anger, he comes out like, are you kidding me right now? Am I in the place of God? This isn't my fault here. It's not like I'm cursing you, the one that I love, and not her. And you see this whole thing right here. If you look at their relationship, what's the problem? They're both what? Well, jealous, right? There's an envy that one has towards the other. Leah, who desperately wants to be loved, Rachel, who desperately wants to have children. And what you see is that Leah finally is able to get past it and just say, you know what? I'm just going to focus on my relationship with his God now, because this isn't coming, and there's nothing I can do about it. She, on the other hand, can't get over it. In fact, she resorts to doing what? The handmaid. Have we seen this before? We didn't really talk about it, but you've seen it before, right? This is where who came from? Same thing? Ishmael. This is where Hagar, Ishmael, that whole story comes from. And so she does the same thing. I don't know if that's just an accepted practice in their time, or if we're seeing the repetition of something that God's like, yeah, this is not the way it's supposed to be. It only causes problems. See? Whichever the case, she gives her servant Bilhah, and he has children through her, bore Jacob a son. And then Rachel said, God has judged me. Verse 6, God has judged me. He's heard my voice. He's given me a son. What does that mean? God has judged me. We usually think of judging in the negative. I don't think this is meant to be in the negative here. Ryan?
The NIV says vindicated.
Okay, vindicated. That's the word that I had in my head. No, you're going to say something like that, Serena?
Yeah, no, American uses vindicated as well.
Okay. Yeah, the Lord has vindicated me. I can now triumph because I have a son. And so now, she's trying to get one up over Leah. And so this is going to continue on, between them. Let's see, verse 9, Leah saw that she'd stopped bearing children. She gave her servant over. It's like, well, if this is what we're doing, now she's going to join in doing that as well. And you're going to end up with a whole bunch of kids between three different women up to this point in time. So, let's see here. We're running out of time so quickly here. Oh, that's what happened. I picked up the wrong Bible. I'm like, this does not look like the right place at all. All right, so Genesis chapter 30. Let's just cut to the chase in the amount of time that we have left. Eventually, we know that they are going to end up fleeing. They're going to end up leaving. And when they leave, when God comes to them and says, hey, it's time for you to take your family and head back because Laban's got some issues with you and he's going to make them known. As they're leaving, anybody know what it is that Rachel does? Yeah, she goes into Laban's tent to steal their household idols. Does that strike anybody as interesting? That you have these two women, one of them steals the household idols, and the other one does what? Praises Yahweh, right? Now I'll just praise Yahweh. One of these, kind of acts like the spoiled prima donna. I'm going to get my way no matter what. And the other one is just kind of like, I'm just resigned that this is the way that things are going to be. And one of the things that when Laban catches up to him And he's like, hey, why did you steal my idols of all things? And Jacob's like, okay, nobody would have stolen your idols. That's just ridiculous. Search everybody's stuff if you want to. Whoever has them, they'll die. Well, why don't they find them? Because she's like, well, Dad, I'm on my camel, but I'm with the way of the woman right now, and I can't really get down. And I'm assuming that things probably haven't changed much. The father was like, okay, that's all I need to hear. I'm moving on, right? Deception, lies, manipulation. Should we expect anything different? No. And as this continues on, I may go over a little bit, but I really want to get through the story. And I'm skipping a lot to do just that very thing. Chapter 35. This is very telling. In Genesis chapter 35, as they've made their way back into the area at this point in time, and they're on their way up to see, to get to I think the place of their father. Anyway, in chapter 35, let's see here. In verse 8, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died. She was buried under an oak below Bethel, and they called its name Alon Bakut. So, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, right? This is Rebekah. This is Jacob's mother's nurse. She's been with them for a very long time, and she is now traveling with them. She dies. And they bury her under a tree. And anyone have a footnote? What do they call that tree? The terebinth, or the oak of weeping. Which means that when she died, there was such a disturbance in the entire group, the entire camp, that people were obviously weeping, so that they did what? They changed the name of the place. They gave her a massive landmark to remember where she's buried. They bury her in this place, and they call it the Oak of Weeping because of this very important, special person who has died on the way, and we're commemorating her with this Oak of Weeping. Move down the chapter. Verse 16, they journeyed from Bethel, and they were some distance from Ephrath, and Rachel went in to labor, and she had hard labor. When her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, you have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Ben-Ani. But his father called him Ben-Yamin, or Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem, and Jacob set a pillar over her tomb. It is the place of Rachel's tomb to this day. And then Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. Who else dies while they're traveling? Yeah, Rachel. She dies. She dies giving birth. And her last, final wish, with the last breath that she has, is to do what? Name her son Ben-Ani, which means what? Anybody have that footnote? All right, son of sorrows, or son of mourning, or son of lament, something like that. In other words, the very last thing that she says, I'm dying because my child is killing me, and I'm going to name him the son of my sorrows. He's brought me my grief, he's brought me my lament, he's brought me my sorrow. And you can almost see again the prima donna coming out. Does Jacob honor her very last dying statement? You can almost see Jacob being like, I'm not calling my child the son of my sorrow. He's going to be the son of my right hand. I'm not calling him the son of my lament. Her last desperate dying wish is ignored. And she's buried where? On the side of a road, and they put a little thing there to mark where she's buried. What does she not get? A towering oak tree. There is no tower of weeping, oak of weeping, the place where the beloved that everybody loved, that was so important to everybody, the place that we want to commemorate by letting everyone know how much mourning, how many tears were poured because of her. There is none of that. She's kind of almost unceremoniously buried. I mean, it's obviously enough that it's remembered to the day of the writing, but even then, it's not even what the nurse got. But you come to the end. Go to Genesis chapter 49. This is after, we'll talk about Joseph, all of that later. This is at the very end. They've come down. Jacob now is on his deathbed. And he says, in verse 29, I'm to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave in the field of Machpelah to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried whom? Leah. At the end of the story, which of these two receives the place of honor to be beside Jacob in the proper burial place as his wife, where they would be side by side until the time of the resurrection? It wasn't the one that he loved. It wasn't the one that he looked at and said, "Man, you look good. I want that." It wasn't the one who was only about herself and held on to the gods of her father, didn't conform to him or to his God or anything else. She gets left on the side of the road with a monument, but the one who sits in the place of honor by his side is which one? It's the one that may not have been as pretty, but it's the one who took his God, very quickly took his God, who desperately wanted to please him, to form a relationship, that all she really wanted to be was to be loved by him. And in the end, I think that's why she's where she is because he came to see Rachel for what she was and Leah for what she was. Which is a huge point for those of you who might be looking for somebody. The outside isn't nearly as important as what's on the inside and finding a woman who is going to worship your God and be with you into eternity. So, like I said, I think it's a beautiful story, but there's a whole lot of messed up to get there. All right, I am way over time. Sorry about that. Thank you for bearing with me as I was trying to cover a whole bunch. We will pick up kind of talking a little bit more about Jacob and moving into Joseph next time. All right, I will turn it over to Richard. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate your patience.